Hello everyone and welcome to my channel YNR Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Claire Grace had heard people talk about destiny before, weak ideas about fate, sad stories about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But she never really believed any of those thoughts had real meaning until the night she was running through the dark Chabot shipping corridor, her heart racing, her breathing shaking, chasing Kyle Abbott's quick message. His voice was different from the usual confident tone she was used to, and that made her feel something bad was about to happen before she even met him. It was much worse than the usual problems that happened in Genoa City. The air felt odd as she walked into the old storage wing, the same warehouse where generations of Abbotts had managed shipments and contracts, where deals were made and family history was built. But tonight the place felt eerie, like the walls themselves had learned to hold their breath. The overhead lights flickered now and then, making a shaky noise from the bad electricity, and the cold came through the concrete so strong that Claire could feel it in her bones as she walked forward, shouting Kyle's name, hoping for a reply that never came. Her voice faded into the thick silence, but then a loud noise like a fight and definitely not calm made her walk quickly toward the far end of the warehouse. And then she saw them. Kyle stood facing Holden, the man who had spent months hiding at the edges of their lives, moving between shadows and crazy thoughts. A man whose reasons were so mixed up with anger that even when he tried to be logical, there was still something dangerous in his words. Kyle looked determined but shaken, trying to calm Holden down with that steady tone Claire knew so well. The same tone he used when he really wanted to keep things under control, even when everything was slipping through his fingers. Holden's eyes looked crazy, like they weren't focused, and he was scared and angry all at the same time. As if he had made up a whole story in his head so strong that the real truth couldn't get to him anymore. Claire stood still just inside the door, hearing Kyle say that the secrets Holden thought he found were not true, and that the betrayals Holden thought happened were just bad misunderstandings caused by fear. Holden was beyond reason. His voice broke with a desperation that told Claire this moment had been coming for much longer than anyone had guessed. She took one step forward and said Kyle's name softly, and right then Holden turned to look at her, his eyes squinting in a way that made her feel a sudden twist in her stomach. Kyle moved right away, putting himself between them like his body could protect her from whatever trouble Holden was bringing. Claire felt a big wave of fear that was so strong she was close to giving in. She tried to talk, trying to persuade Holden, to remind him that people cared about him, that the truth was he wasn't alone. But everything unfolded in one terrible, confusing rush. Holden's face twisted into something that hardly looked like he understood, and before Claire could even notice what was happening, he moved forward quickly. She didn't see the blade clearly, just the quick flash of metal, Kyle's sudden gasp, and the way his body moved before he took a step back. Time shattered. Sound warped. Claire shouted his name, the sound tearing from her throat like it was the end of everything she had left. Kyle fell into her arms and she went down with him, helping him to the floor. Holden stood several feet away, frozen in place, watching what he had done. His face showed both fear and shock, like he couldn't believe he had crossed a point from which there was no return. Kyle's breathing was shaky, light, and hard to catch, and Claire felt everything inside her fall apart as she put her hands on him, not to push or to rush, but just because she needed to touch him, to keep him close, to make sure he didn't disappear. She said his name over and over, her voice getting shaky each time, begging him to stay awake, telling him he was strong, telling him help was on the way, even though the quiet outside the warehouse showed that no one else knew they were there. Kyle's eyes opened just enough to look into hers, and that was what broke her. The familiar warmth she always saw in them still glowed, but didn't fade away, like even in pain, even as he stood on the edge of something he couldn't turn back from. He didn't want her to face it alone. He tried to speak, but his breath got stuck, his jaw clenching tightly from frustration or pain. She couldn't tell which. She asked him not to speak, to conserve his strength, but she knew Kyle too well to believe he would hold back any important words. His hand moved slowly, fingers barely touching her face in a way that was so softly sad it made Claire feel like her heart was breaking. She leaned in, bringing their foreheads together, tears flowing freely, soaking into the collar of his jacket. "Kyle," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please stay with me. Please don't leave. You can't leave. Not like this," Holden whispered behind them, his voice breaking, a weak apology that barely came out as words. But Claire couldn't look at him, couldn't focus on anything except the man in her arms, whose life was fading too fast, too silently, like sand slipping through her fingers. Kyle took a deep breath, then got himself under control, drawing on a strength that felt unbelievable after how weak he had gotten. He opened his eyes completely and looked at her with such clear focus that she was left speechless. Then, softly, gently but clearly meant, he said the 5 words that would stay with Claire deep inside long after this night was over. "Claire, promise you'll stop him." 5 words. 5 quiet, powerful words that held everything. Fear, love, trust, warning, hope. It wasn't a goodbye. Kyle wasn't saying anything to end the conversation. He was giving her a mission. Purpose. A truth he thought only she could keep safe. Claire shook her head, feeling broken, because she didn't want this responsibility, didn't want this last request to be the moment she finally realized he was slipping away. "Don't talk like that," she begged, her voice breaking. "We're going to fix this. You're going to come back from this. You have to." But Kyle's expression softened with a tenderness that made her feel exposed, and she knew the way people sense a storm before it comes, that he was moving out of her grasp. She held his hand even tighter, wrapping her fingers around his as if she could keep him in the world just by wanting it really badly. But his body had begun to still. His breathing grew faint, and with a final gentle breath, his hand relaxed in hers. Claire's thoughts broke apart in the silence that came next. She didn't scream. She didn't speak. She just held him, rocking a little, her tears falling on his still chest. The warehouse felt unnaturally cold now. Colder than any winter night in Wisconsin. Colder than the emptiness she had always been scared of but never really knew how to understand until this moment. Holden took a step back, shocked by what he had just done, whispering apologies over and over, his voice shaking, but Claire finally lifted her eyes to meet his, and in that moment she felt a fury she had never known before. Her sadness turned into something strong, something cutting, something that couldn't be broken. Kyle's 5 words scorched her inside like a hot brand. She stood up slowly, carefully placing Kyle on the concrete, then ran a hand over his cheek one last time before standing completely. Holden stepped back as she faced him, her look no longer shocked but changed, full of a strong resolve that even he could feel and understand. The distant sound of sirens finally reached them, first faint and quiet, then getting louder, cutting through the thick silence like something bad was coming. Claire didn't move toward them. She didn't call for help. She just looked at Holden with such confidence that it made his knees weak. Kyle's death was not the end. It was the beginning of accountability, the beginning of truth, the beginning of Claire's promise. Those 5 words would spread through Genoa City, through the Abbotts, through the Newmans, through all the delicate connections and conflicts, until the storm Kyle predicted finally came. As Claire stood in the dim light of the warehouse, the last pieces of her innocence slipping away with the quiet buzz of electricity above her, she made a promise, quietly, strongly, and without doubt. She vowed that Kyle's last breath wouldn't be wasted, that Holden would pay for the damage he caused, and that she would hold on to Kyle's truth, his warning and his belief in her, until justice itself remembered the man she had loved. Nothing in Genoa City would ever be the same again. Claire Grace never thought one moment could change everything. But as she sat on the cold warehouse floor with Kyle Abbott's head in her lap, she realized nothing in Genoa City would ever be the same again. His last breath was still in the cold air, quiet, shaky and heart-wrenching, and the 5 words he had said, "Claire, promise you'll stop him," stayed in her chest like a promise burned into her bones. She stayed still, said nothing, and didn't even try to dry the tears that were running down her face. She just looked at the man who had taken Kyle away from her. Holden stood a few feet away, his hands trembling, his face as pale as if he'd just seen something terrible, the burden of what he'd done pressing down on him like a poison. He whispered apologies, weak, empty sounds that floated into the air like smoke, but Claire didn't really hear them. Everything inside her was shifting, becoming clear, and turning into a decision she didn't realize she had. She placed Kyle's body down slowly, running a trembling hand over his cheek one last time, and then she stood up. When she looked at Holden, something in her eyes made him jump back. He wouldn't listen, Holden stammered, stepping back as Claire moved closer. "I didn't mean it. It wasn't supposed to happen, Claire, you have to believe me." "Believe you?" Her voice was low, quiet, but sharper than anything she had ever said. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a scream. It was worse. It was the sound of something breaking in a way that couldn't be fixed again. Claire took another step, and the flickering overhead light made jagged shadows across her face. You took his life, Holden. You took Kyle. And you want me to believe you? Holden's eyes quickly scanned the room, full of fear and urgency, like he was searching for an exit that wasn't there. He was going to destroy everything, he insisted, his voice shaking. He found out, he realized what I was planning, and he was going to reveal it. I couldn't let him. Claire's breath caught, not out of fear but fury. So you killed him. She took a step forward, and Holden backed up until his shoulders hit a pile of wooden boxes. Kyle was trying to help you. He was trying to stop you from hurting yourself. He lied. Holden whispered, shaking his head hard. He lied about everything. You can't trust the Abbotts. You can't trust Kyle. He wanted to stop you from finding out the truth. The truth. Claire's voice became firmer, cutting through the cold air. Kyle was the only person in this room who knew the truth, Holden. You killed him because you were too scared to deal with it. Holden swallowed, his chest rising and falling heavily. You don't understand. No. Claire stepped closer again. Their faces were just a foot apart, and she could see the fear in his eyes turning into something wild and out of control. You don't understand. Kyle used his last breath to beg me to stop you. Not to forgive you. Not to understand you. To stop you. Holden's face crumpled. Claire, are you going to betray me, are you? His voice broke as he said the words. You're not like him. You're not like them, he said, extending a shaking hand as if hoping she would take it. Claire looked at the hand, the very hand that had killed Kyle, and something deep inside her broke. Don't, she breathed, stepping back. Don't you ever touch me with that hand. Holden's arm fell right away. You think I'm going to help you get out of here? Claire continued. After what you did. What did Kyle leave with me? Her voice cracked for a moment, raw and trembling, and she quickly forced it back down. No. I'm not letting you leave this room, Holden said. Fear flashed in Holden's eyes, real fear. That washed away all the crazy ideas he'd had before. You're making a mistake, he whispered. If you turn me in, everything I've worked for, everything. Everything. Claire repeated, surprised. What about everything Kyle worked for? What about Harrison? What about the Abbotts? What about the future you took from all of them? Her voice shook. What about the future you just took from me? Holden's lips opened, but no words came out. His silence said everything. Claire took another step forward, carefully on purpose, until Holden was trapped between her and the boxes. She didn't touch him. She didn't need to. Her just being there made him back up against the wall like a scared animal. You wanted a villain, she said, her voice quiet once more, almost unnervingly calm. You wanted someone to blame. You wanted someone to fear. You wanted someone you could control because you were too scared to take charge of your own life. She shook her head. Kyle was not your enemy, Holden. Kyle was your last chance. And you destroyed it. Holden pushed his back more firmly against the crates. Claire, please. His voice was almost too quiet to hear anymore. I don't want to go to prison. You should have thought of that, she said, before you took the life of a father, a son, a friend, and the man who trusted me. Her eyes were full of tears, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. Not while Holden could see. The faraway sirens got louder, echoing through the cold air, signaling that time was quickly running out. Holden shook his head. Claire, you don't have to do this. You loved him, I understand, but... No, she interrupted, moving closer so he could feel her breath. You can't mention his name. Holden stopped moving. You don't get to speak about him. Not now. Never. She pointed toward the warehouse entrance where red and blue lights flickered faintly. You can either walk through that door and deal with what you've done, or wait for them to pull you out. Your choice. Holden's legs buckled. His voice trembled. You're going to let them take me? Yes. Claire's answer was quick, harsh, and unforgiving. You killed Kyle Abbott. And you want mercy? Holden dropped to his knees. Claire didn't look away. You wanted the truth, Holden? Her voice was like a cold whisper. Here it is. I'm going to honor Kyle. I'm going to keep his final promise. And that begins with making sure you never hurt another person again. She walked away from him then, the final sign she wasn't coming back, heading back toward Kyle's unmoving body, kneeling down beside him again as the warehouse door suddenly opened and police rushed in. Holden didn't resist as they cuffed him. He didn't look at Claire. He didn't speak. Claire didn't watch as he was taken away. Her hand was on Kyle's chest, and she spoke in a quiet, shaky voice filled with pain. I kept my promise. The siren's lights hit her face, creating lines of blue and red, and Claire Grace realized then that Genoa City would never be the same again. Not after this. Not after him. Not after the night she faced the man who took the heartbeat of someone she wasn't ready to lose.